Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Life Talks. Today I have returning guest Matt Izzo. Matt, welcome to the show again, brother.
Thanks. I appreciate you having me. I've been on a lot of podcasts. I think this is the first time I've been a repeat guest on one. So
Awesome, man.
I guess that means I did a good job on my first one. So I appreciate you having me back on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what I enjoyed about our first conversation is so much. Maybe we could start here. Just go right into it. Is the work of David Hawkins and that I have the chart right above my computer, just like on that bottom. You have shame, guilt, apathy, and then on the top, enlightenment, peace. And I think deep down, we all want that peace, enlightenment. You're training for Ironman right
Yeah.
now, so maybe if we could start there, like how has training, like running, exercising, working out, how has that helped you with your consciousness level? Has that raised it? And if so, how has it done that? And maybe we
Yeah.
could dive into that.
So it's completely raised it because it's energy, right? Energy and emotion are kind of synonymous. So, with all the training I'm doing now, I am in a pretty high state of energy all the time, right? I this morning I swam 3,500 yards. I'm going to run 6 miles in the afternoon, right? So this takes a lot of energy. So I'm in a pretty high state of energy all the time, just from all the training I've done. My nutrition, getting the sun exposure right, getting my physical health in order, and it brings me energy. And what I found is that sure, I still experience low moments, right? Everyone does. It's part of being human, is experiencing the lows along with the highs, but the lows are not as long, right? And they're not as intense, and they don't, because my state of energy is so high, like how can I be sad when I have so much energy all the time, right? How can I be in a state of apathy or something like that when I have so much energy and I'm just I just want to get outside and do stuff. So it's helped a lot, especially kind of climbing up out of those really low energy states. Once you get to those higher states of energy, though, that kind of transcends our physical body in a lot of ways, right? Because our physical body is only there's only so much energy in our physical body, and when you get to these higher states like love and joy and peace, right, these are states of energy that transcend our physical body. And getting there, just getting in great shape is not going to get you to those super high states for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, it's something I thought about, like those feelings of joy. I think what the world calls like happiness, people say they want happiness, is not, it's very different from joy. You can convince yourself that happiness is what's going to bring you, I'm going to get the new car, I'm going to get the
Yeah.
money. But joy, like how would you define those two differences, between happiness and joy, or, in the chart, desire, right?
Yeah.
Fulfilling your desires.
Happiness is something that is a temporary kind of state, right? It's caused by something. It's not an internal sort of state of being. It's just something happens and you feel happy, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. It's great to be happy, right? Everyone wants to be happy, but people just chase it because it is not like, it's not a permanent state. And like you said, getting the new car, yeah, it'll make you happy, it'll feel great for a few weeks, and then it just becomes your car, right? And then
Yeah.
then you're dealing with all the problems of having a car, right? You got a flat tire, you don't care that it's a Lamborghini. Now you have to deal with fixing your flat tire, right? And you come out and bird crap on it or something, right? Like, so it just becomes part of your life. And then if you lose the car, well, it almost kind of makes you even less happy than when you started, right? Because this just
Yeah.
becomes kind of absorbed into your normal sort of state of being, right? So happiness, right, it's always going to be fleeting because it's not something you can ever hold on to, right? Because it's dependent on external things happening to you, right? Novelty kind of happening. There's definitely some novelty with happiness, because I don't care how great your life is, if there's no novelty in it, well, then how's something going to make you feel happy, right? Like getting on your private jet, the first time you do it, it probably makes you really happy, but when you do it for the 100th time, it probably doesn't make you as happy anymore. I almost guarantee it doesn't. So that's where like a state of joy is more just, you're not dependent on anything outside of yourself to, make you feel good. It comes from within, and it's not dependent upon the new car or the private jet or anything else that's an external thing that makes you feel happy. You just feel that joy from within. And for me, that's really what the primary difference is. And people sell happiness, or they try to buy happiness, because it's not something that you'll ever get, right? These things that we seek to acquire, right, they don't fulfill us, and that's with good reason, because if the thing made you happy forever, well, then you'd stop doing it, right? Like, sex is a great example. If sex made you happy forever, right, then you'd stop doing it. Who cares, right? Or eating a meal, right? You ate a meal, you're happy forever. Well, you're not going to go out and look for food anymore, right? Because you're happy.
Yeah,
So
and
so
that's why that's
we
such a big industry. That's why sex sells, right?
yeah
Because it takes advantage of that like primal. And
yeah
I guess that would be force, right? Anything,
yeah
and the top of that is pride. Well, if
yeah
I feel pride, then I will
yeah.
be,
And it's interesting you should mention pride, because pride is something that I really kind of had an epiphany with pretty recently. Even in these last few days, and because it's when you read Hawkins' work, and you kind of come to the point with pride, it can be a little confusing as to why pride is still a low state of being, right? And there's a lot of energy in pride, right? And it's not necessarily a bad thing, right? These none of these states are good or bad, but you'd rather be in a state of pride than in a state of apathy, right? And I think
yes,
everybody would agree with that, because at least when you're feeling pride, you're feeling good about yourself or your situation or your group or whatever. Where a state of apathy, you just don't care. But the difference is between pride and love is pride is it's built around accomplishments, it's built around success, right? And it's built around superiority to others in a certain way, right? You're comparing yourself maybe with your past self, maybe with other people, right? Or your group, you're comparing your group to other groups, right? And it causes you to feel pride, right? Whereas love, or we want to say unconditional love, it isn't dependent on any of that stuff, right? So if I'm training for an Ironman and I'm doing it from a state of pride, right, I'm chasing this achievement, and I'm competing with other people, and I'm trying to beat them to the finish line, right? And depending on how I do, I feel good about myself, right? But a state of love is different, and this is where it can be confusing, because if I'm in a state of unconditional love, then I am no more or less worthy of love if I decide to wake up in the morning and not do any of my training, right? And, when I was 250 pounds and I looked in the mirror compared to now, I was no more or less worthy of love then than I am now. Like, if I want to look at, how I've changed my body, got into shape, I feel pride about that, right? That's a lower state though, because I'm comparing myself to where I was. And I say, well, that was bad, this is better. I feel good, right? Because look at how I've changed. But from a state of love, you would look at both of those and love each the same, right? And
yeah,
it doesn't matter if you're failing. It doesn't matter even if you're not trying, because you are enough, in and of yourself, right? You don't have to do anything to be worthy of love. You're worthy of love just for being almost. And you see there's a whole lot more energy in that state than there is in pride, because with pride, well, what happens if I get hurt and I don't finish the Ironman, or I get a flat tire and I don't finish the Ironman, right? Like, well, now all the energy from that kind of goes away, right? Or let's say I do finish the Ironman and I feel great. I feel a lot of pride. Well, again, kind of like happiness, that's not going to be a lasting feeling, because nobody wants to be sitting here, in 2027, listening to me talk about the Ironman I did 5 years ago, right? How proud I was of that, right? Because, that feeling is going to be fleeting. It's going to, be there, when it's happening, after it happens, but then it's going to just fade off into the distance. So, pride is, as we all know, it can be a dangerous state to be in, and so it's really right on the cusp there of, delving into courage and then these higher states. And, so pride is good if you're trying to get yourself out of a low state, right? And you don't have to reach for the top of the chart when you're looking at this, just to improve your state. If you were in a perpetual state of shame, like I was, right, feeling proud about yourself, because you actually did some stuff, right, you actually achieved some things, that's going to be a much better state to be in than being ashamed of who you are. So, yeah, it can be a beneficial stepping stone, but it is not the final destination.
Yeah, I think it was well said. Um, Going into Ironman. So for people who are not familiar at all with Ironman, I'm sure some of the people seeing this are, because I see a lot of people in the Twitter world who are, gearing up for it. Can you explain what an Ironman is? And also if you can go into like what fuels you to do that? Because I think it's interesting. Like, I know we've both talked about David Goggins last time.
Yeah.
To me, what's more impressive than him running let's say a 200-mile race or running 8 consecutive weekends, 100 miles is what makes somebody do that, because that to me, I'm very interested in the energy. You have to deal with fighting your mind because your mind says, I don't want to run today. So if you can go into that and also, maybe start with what is the Ironman and what made you sign up and
Yeah. So Ironman is it's a 140.6 mile endurance race. It starts with a 2.4 mile swim, and then it's a 112 mile bike ride, and it's a 26.2 mile run at the end. So it's a full marathon, and you have 17 hours to complete it in order to be officially, deemed to be an Ironman. So it's obviously a difficult day, right? And it takes a lot of training to get to the point of doing it. And if you want to ask me why I'm doing it, it's kind of a hard question for me to answer at this point, honestly, because I don't really necessarily think I know. When I went back to how I really got involved in this was I started off doing an Ironman 70.3 or a half Ironman, which is the Ironman just cut in half, right? So
okay.
distances are half, but to me it seemed daunting at the time, having never done any kind of really endurance races or anything like that. And doing a 1.2 mile swim, a 56-mile bike ride, and a 13.1 mile run seems pretty intimidating to somebody who's on the outside of this, right? Who doesn't have the perspective of having done these sort of things. I signed up for it to teach myself a lesson about procrastination because I was trying to sign up for a shorter race, but I waited a few days after the sign up started, and the race then ended up selling out. So I missed out on that, and there was a half Ironman for that same
So half
weekend.
Ironman was the first one that you did,
Well, yeah.
or did
So
you start at 5Ks or like?
no, well, the first triathlon I did was in international distance triathlon. So it was like a 6/10 mile swim in the ocean, an 18-mile bike ride, and a 5-mile run, right? So it gets progressively longer as you go. And I was trying to sign up for another race of a similar distance to that, ended up selling out. So I said, you know what? Well, I should have signed up for this the day the signups opened. I even set a reminder for myself, and I just snoozed it because I didn't feel like doing it, right? And I waited a few days, and then it was sold out. So I said, well, now I'm going to teach myself a lesson, and I'm going to sign up to do this half Ironman, right? I wasn't sure I could do it at the time, right? It terrified me, right? Because it just seemed so far from anything I'd ever done before in my life. I'd only entered the first race of my life a couple months earlier, right? So I ended up running a half marathon that year. This is in 2019. And then obviously 2020 happens. So the race ends up getting canceled, but I spend all year through 2020 training for it as best I could through the pools being closed, all the gyms being closed. I just ran and I cycled, and when the outdoor pools open, started swimming again, right? I embraced it because I thought it was going to be canceled. It got pushed back to September, but I had no choice but to keep going because you can't just show up to this thing and wing it. And this is one of the things I like about these endurance sports is I've always tried to take the easy way out in life, right? And I've always tried to kind of get by with the bare minimum, in school and stuff like that. I was a pretty smart guy, and I didn't need to put the work in order to get decent grades, right? So I just did what I needed to do to do that. But with this kind of thing, you can't do that, right? So I trained all year for it. The race ended up getting up pushed back to the whole other year, basically. So I ended up running a marathon because I was in really good shape and I wanted to achieve something, right? In 2020. So I found the marathon, I ran a marathon, and then I just trained all through 2021 again for this half Ironman that I was doing. I did a bunch of other races and stuff before that ended up happening. But finally, when I did it last September, well, I trained for that race for like 23 months. So it was a big progression, and I got to the point where not only was I confident in myself, right? I did pretty well in the race. I finished like in the top 40% of my age group, top third of all finishers. I did it in 5 hours and 48 minutes, which is a pretty decent time.
And how long is a marathon?
This is the half Ironman.
The half Ironman. Okay.
Yeah.
The marathon. How long is the marathon too?
That's a 26.2 mile run.
26.2. Okay.
Yeah. So I doing these events caused me to kind of have a shift in my perspective, right?
Yeah.
So, and I had kind of decided early on in this journey that I'm going to do an Ironman, a full Ironman, and I'm going to write a book about it. Well, after I did the half Ironman, the Ironman doesn't seem really daunting. I don't really feel any anxiety about the distance of it, because I've really developed an appreciation for just how these things scale, right? Going from somebody who couldn't run more than 3 or 4 miles in my life to, running a marathon and then, doing this half Ironman. I have a real appreciation now for how these kinds of long distance events scale. And, it's just a longer race, and you just go at it with less intensity, right? And manage your effort level throughout the race, and get your nutrition right. But that becomes really important because it's such a long day. When I was doing the Ironman, then it's like, well, this doesn't even feel like a big challenge at this point, right? Like I know I could do it. It wasn't like the whole like question about, well, can I do this? Like that was answered. Like I knew I could do it. It was more a question of, do I want to do it? Right. And I think that's an important point to get to with everything you're doing in life, is knowing that you can do something and then having it be a question of, well, do I want to do that? Right.
Yes.
Because doing the Ironman is a huge time investment.
Well, because that's why I asked you that question, right? Because why do you do what you do? And it's funny you say, I don't really know, but, I've been procrastinating, because I can relate to that. Same thing with me, and doing that. So, but there has to be some, I feel like there has to be some sort of why, I mean, for me, it's been like, for me pushing on the workout is just like, the world is so full of weak people, and I've been one of those weak people, and I want to be a stronger version of myself, so that helps other people be strong. And we've settled for weakness. So like, was it really just, I don't know, I just want to do it, or was there?
Well, with doing the half Ironman, there was the whole thing in my mind. Like I felt like I was doing something that felt impossible. Okay. And what the struggle with this is now is it doesn't feel impossible anymore, right? Like now I know, right? And it doesn't even feel like, I don't feel any anxiety about this, because
I feel like I can do it with looking at your background, bro. Like it's like awesome.
Well, I've been training, for middle and long distance triathlon now for like 3 years. So it's not that big of a deal. It's just kind of a longer race at this point, right? And it involves just a different training style, more long distance runs and bike rides. And then, like I said, moderating my efforts. So I kind of started doing this, and I really wasn't gung ho about it. I didn't have a lot of energy about it, but I kind of made a commitment to myself that I was going to follow through and do this, and I was going to do an Ironman and write a book about it. So here I am, I'm doing the Ironman. We are 95 days away, and we'll see how it goes. But you have to just show up every day, and you have to put in the work consistently. And you don't feel motivated to train, well, too bad. You got to do it anyway, because on November the 5th, I'm going to line up in Panama City Beach, Florida, and I'm going to have to cover 140.6 miles. So, and I want to put out a good showing, I don't want to finish last in this race. I'm not going to finish last in this race. Right. But, I want to really see what I'm capable of doing. I'm 40 years old now, and I feel like I wasted a lot of potential in my youth. Right. And, I see the kind of thing I'm capable of doing now. And it's just, I love being out there and doing these things just because, it feels like I'm, a kid again or something like that, and I'm honoring my potential and my
Yeah.
genetic fitness and things like this by doing this, by pushing myself further than I realized I could go. So that's why I'm doing it, and we'll see. There's a lesson in it for me, to be sure, and I'm not going to evaluate kind of what that is until after the process is over with, right? I don't want to start writing the book until I did it, because I don't necessarily know what it's teaching me until I do it and I learn that lesson.
Yeah. So what about now? As far as like what, how far have you run now? Like what was the most, was it that half?
It was the
Um,
marathon
it was the
that I ran in
marathon.
2020. It was
So
26.2
what did you feel
miles.
like after you ran that marathon? Like, because that was the first time you did that. What was it like? What was your consciousness at? Was it like, did you feel like so much more in the flow? Did you feel where were you at?
It was a very unpleasant experience, I'll say. And I've run 3 half marathons now, which is 13.1 miles, and I find those to be enjoyable races. Because they're much more manageable. Because I've run probably 10 or more miles a few dozen times at this point in my life. So, a run of that distance really isn't daunting to me at all, right? And it's more just a question of what my effort level is going to be for the run, right? So it's more just about getting into shape and getting out there and just running. I ran a half marathon in an hour and 42 last year, right? And when you're training for multi-hour events, it's not really that long. My training sessions are typically an hour to 3+ hours, right? So being out there running for that long, it's not that big of a deal. The marathon, I didn't get enough time to like actually train for it. Time on my feet. I only had like 10 weeks of just dedicated running. I was running while I was training for the half Ironman too, and obviously a lot of the fitness I built is transferable. So it's just I was trying to do it in under 4 hours, and it's a bit depressing because you just kind of see the goal slowly slipping out of your grasp, right? Like every mile goes by, and it's like, oh man, I'm trending a few seconds too slow, right? But right, like, well, I have to be hitting, I think it's like 909 miles or like 919 miles or whatever in order to keep the pace, right? And a few are under, and it's so it became a real mental challenge, and just
Yeah.
pushing myself, for that distance, right? You got to like mile 20, and I'm like, all right, I only got 6.2 miles left. I got like an hour to run it in. I've run 6.2 miles in under an hour dozens of times, right? Like I just got to do it one more time, but I wasn't physically capable of doing it at that point. So it's just, pushing yourself and just, and you could even see with my times, like my last mile was my slowest mile of the race for sure, because by that point I kind of realized, well, I'm not hitting this goal. And, you lose some of the impetus behind it. But after the race, I was pretty beat. I was in the immediate aftermath of it. I really even had a hard time standing up at that point. I had to just kind of like sit down on the grass for a bit, and then
Yeah.
getting back up was tough. So I would say that my level of consciousness in the immediate aftermath was pretty low, because I didn't have a whole lot of energy, right? But in the days that followed, I felt great about it, and it was really an amazing achievement for me to do that. It was a challenging race because it was during 2020, and all the races got really weird with all the COVID stuff happening. And so usually marathons are, you're in a big crowd when you start, and there's spectators everywhere. Well, this is more like a time trial start where everybody started like 10 seconds apart. And there weren't a lot of spectators. So, you were basically running alone for the most part. So, which makes it hard, when you get the energy from the crowd and from your fellow competitors and stuff,
Sure.
it makes it a lot easier. That was just hard, being out there pushing myself. And I'll also say that I ran a 4x4x48, which if you want to bring up David Goggins, which I don't know if you're familiar with that,
I'm not, no.
that's the David Goggins challenge. He invented this challenge where you run 4 miles every 4 hours for 48 hours.
Oh, I did hear about
Yeah.
that. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I did that last March in March of 2021, and that kind of shattered some of the perceived limitations in my mind, right? Because you just get used to, you don't want to be waking up at 3 a.m. on a cold March morning in New Jersey, right? 25 degrees and windy. It's 3 a.m. I had run 28 miles already over the past, couple days. I hadn't gotten decent amount of sleep in days at this point, right? It's just, you got to get out there and drag yourself for a 4 mile run, right?
Yeah.
Once you can, after I do those sorts of things, well, now seeing these other events, it's like, oh, okay, I can handle that. That's not so bad. I can push through that.
What did friends and family say when you'd say you want to do these things? Were they supportive? Were they like, well, why are you doing it? Like,
Yeah, they're
yeah,
supportive for the most part. I've most of the low energy people I've cut out of my life. So
yeah,
the people who wouldn't be supportive, I don't really even talk to them much anymore.
well said.
Courtney, she's great. She's kind of the one who pushed me into doing the Ironman, because I remember at one point years ago, she's like, "Oh, you're going to do a full distance Ironman," and I'm like, "No, I don't know about that." I'm like, I
Awesome.
doubt it. But she put it out there, and here I am years later, gearing up to do it. It's kind of a life changing experience doing these things, and realizing that I'm capable of so much more than I thought I was. But again, to kind of tie it full circle though, is it's only my physical body, right? So yeah, it's great your physical body can do these sort of things, but it isn't everything. It's not even most things, right? So great, I can do these things and push myself physically, but it doesn't really, it's not a whole, it's not a holistic growth experience, I'll say, because it's really just kind of focused on physical and mental, and not so much into spiritual growth, right? So there's much higher states of energy that are accessible even just from like sitting on your couch than there are from doing these physical things.
Yeah. Well, one more question on the physicals.
Yeah,
I do want to go
sure.
there. What do you do as far as, I mean, where do you see consciousness as far as with your food? Because I find myself is like, I have these bouts where it's just like, it's almost like the automatic version of me will just put stuff in my mouth, and you don't, and I think most people operate that way. They
Mm-hmm.
just eat stuff. They don't really are conscious about every single piece of food. And you should be, you should be careful what you say and how you say it and grow in that. So what's your take on food, and how have you shifted consciously, if you have, with food, and how do you navigate as far as what you put in your body?
Yeah, I've changed a lot, right? And this is the advice that I give to people who I coach for fat loss, and I put it out there on Twitter and stuff, right? You don't have to be perfect to do better than yesterday. So when I started out in 2016 losing weight, right, I would eat the idea that I would eat the foods now that I ate then, I was like, oh my God, I couldn't eat that trash, right? But I started somewhere, right? And I started and I just kept iterating, right? Kept changing, kept watching what other smart people were doing, and borrowing a little bit from them, right? Seeing how it worked for me, and just
Yeah, a lot of
it,
experimentation.
yeah, it's something I've added to over the years. I have a pretty strange eating routine, which I can go into a bit if you
Yeah,
want.
sure.
I wake up in the morning and the first thing I have is homemade bone broth that Courtney makes, and then I will have some goat milk kefir. which is good for your stomach, right? Good for
Ignore my
all
dog if you can hear him in the background. I don't know if
yeah,
you can.
yeah. So
Someone downstairs.
I'll have some kefir, and then before I
Yeah, I've heard
train.
mixed things on Kefir. I've heard it's like, well, it's kind of like this dead. Let me just get him real quick. Sorry, I just had to restart that because my dog wants to interrupt our podcast. But you were saying we were talking about Kefir and like, what's your view on Kefir? And because I've heard it's like kind of this dead thing that you're bringing in, but I've also heard probiotics, right? It's positive for the gut. So, what's your experience with
Yeah,
that?
I never liked dairy much, and there's actually a video of me trying it for the first time on my Twitter feed from last year. Just because I never cared much for dairy, but I saw some good things about it. I believe the kefir it's a grain or something off the top of my head. It's a grain or something that dates back thousands of years to some ancient culture that's kind of been like kept it's a culture that's been kept alive throughout the generations, really. And it's good for probiotics, right? For healing your gut microbiome, which is increasingly important, right? We're not just mental health, right? The whole body kind of plays into that. So it's been great for me. And I quite like it now, and if you're connected with your body, you can tell what foods are healthy. You don't need to read studies on the internet. If you are connected with your body
Yeah,
and you can tell how you feel after you eat something or consume something, right? You can tell if it's good for you or not because your body knows if it's good, right? And some of the stuff Hawkins talks about, right, with those muscle testing and things like that, right? Your body knows what's healthy, and when you consume it, if you want to consume it again, right, you have to kind of think about where that's coming from. If you just want the cheap pleasure of the dopamine rush, right, from eating a candy bar, that's different than having this sour goat milk, right? But so I've kind of come to crave that. I have that every day. I'm a big fan of that. Before I train, I will usually have some raw local honey, which I think is great. Lots of healing benefits from that, and just nothing but good things to say about that. Again, one of those things. If you Google it, you'll say, "Oh, it doesn't work" or whatever, and it's like, well, I don't know. I use it. I like it. It seems to help.
trust
So
the experts.
I keep doing it, right? And I'm not really so worried about what the people in the middle of the bell curve are doing. I'm trying to figure out what the exceptional outliers are doing, right? And I'm trying to
Mm.
mimic them. I'm not trying to be average. I'm trying to be exceptional. So then after I train, I will eat raw beef liver,
Yeah,
which
I've heard you talk about with reach out to Liver King, right?
yeah, so I kind of picked it up from him. Well, other people too. Eating organ meats is good for us. It's pretty undeniable, right? We evolved to eat organ meats. If you study ancient cultures, right, that it's the first meat that they go to, right, is the organ meats because it's richer in nutrients and all these sort of things. So I've, taken to eating raw liver. I don't think eating it raw is necessarily magical or anything like that. That's just the only way I've managed to find it palatable, which, believe it or not, is raw, kind of with in maple syrup with some sea salt, and I just kind of swallow it down as little chunks, right? So it goes down pretty easy. And again, it's something that I find that I crave, right? Like if I go a few days without having any and I'm cutting some up, like I'm cutting up some liver and I'm like craving eating this raw liver, which is just, this sounds crazy, right? If you
Yeah,
would have asked me that a few years ago, I would have said, oh, that's disgusting. How could I do that? But I'll be sitting there cutting the liver up and I'll be like, oh man, I can't wait to finish cutting this so I can eat some of this stuff.
yeah.
So I'll usually have that. Then I'll have like
Do you notice a different feeling after you? Like, do you feel like
yeah, I feel great.
healthier with it? Like
Yeah,
after,
I feel great. It's one of those things you want to make sure you don't eat too much of because there's certain vitamins in there. Vitamin A, you can overdose on. You can get too
sure.
much of it. So I eat about an ounce most days. Which seems to work pretty well for me. And then I'll have 6 whole eggs. I'll have some oatmeal and some fruit for breakfast. After I train, because it's important after training to get good meals in, right? You want to get protein, and carbs are important for me, right? It might not be for everybody, but for what I'm doing, they're important.
Yeah, do you have like a healthy pre-workout? Like I know some people will have like beet juice, like a not healthy pre-workout,
No,
like some energy thing that'll shoot you up and down. But like, is there any foods or anything that you'll take before a
just
workout
the
or
honey,
carbs? Just the
just the
honey.
honey. Yeah, I'll have a spoonful of honey usually. Um, I fuel a lot of my training sessions too. So most of my training sessions, I'm also taking in calories while I'm training, just because they're long. And a big part of doing these endurance races is taking on calories while you're doing it, right? So if you're going to do a 10 or a 12 or a 14-hour Ironman, obviously you need to be able to take in calories while you're doing it to sustain your effort.
So what do you
So
do for that? Like, so as you're
it,
running,
it
or is
it
that like,
depends. I like to drink something called Tailwind, which is basically just some like sugar and minerals that mixes in the water.
so you're having
It's
like electrolytes as you're
yeah,
going?
and there's some sugar in it too. I'll use honey. I like to eat dates on the bike, just because it's easier to digest on the bike than it is
Sure.
to while you're running. It's a bit of a lesser effort level, and you're not bouncing up and down as much. So on the bike, it's usually kind of dates, and then running, it's more honey. I have to really kind of get this dialed in for what I'm going to do during the Ironman, because it's such an important part of it. But it's probably going to be some kind of either gels that they sell or honey. Maple syrup's also good. But I drink a lot of the Tailwind, which is just sugar mixed in water with electrolytes. And it's important, right? Because if I want to train at a high level, right, and I want to be having positive adaptations to these training sessions, I got to make sure I'm properly fueled for these training sessions before, during, and after. It's a huge part of it, which is why nutrition isn't going to be the same for everybody. You'll see people
Yeah.
who have tons of great success with low carb and keto approaches and stuff like that. And well, I would say for the most part, most endurance athletes will not benefit from that sort of approach, right? Carbohydrates are good and important if you're going to be living that kind of lifestyle, you have to eat in accordance with that. But to kind of answer your question, right? Consciousness of the food, I think it's really important. So we spend and we buy the highest quality food that we can, because for me, it makes the most sense. Why would you want to try to skimp on the food quality, right? I get not everybody can buy the highest quality food, but you also might want to look at, well, what are what else are you spending your money on,
Yeah, for
right?
sure.
So if you're spending $250 at the bar every weekend and you're buying cheap food so you can afford to do that, well, you'd probably be better off if you spent the
So
extra money on higher quality food.
the pushback on that I would have is just, and I'm sure you would agree, is that the the problem that I find myself too is like I think there's a lot of marketing bullshit out there too, right? Where it's just like, well, this is the organic super
Yeah.
duper. Whereas I generally go towards organic. I want to have healthy
Mm-hmm.
food, but sometimes I'm like, is there really a difference for certain foods? So do you have that same thing as you're going through different food? Like, is there
Yeah.
certain things that you like, I remember reading with like GMOs and all that, certain fruits that like corn and tomatoes are important to eat
Yeah.
organic. I heard that because that's like such a big industry and they do
Yeah.
that. But, how do you separate that where it's like, let's say someone who doesn't have that much money where they start just, just be smart about it, go inside. What would you
Yeah.
say?
There is a lot of marketing with it, right? And probably a lot of BS. But I find that food, will say labeled as organic, tends to be higher quality than food that's not organic. And I think it makes sense because they charge more money for it, right? So in order to justify charging more money for it, I think it has to be more than just the label on it, right? The food tends to taste better. If it's really apparent with like eggs, and there's ways that they can gamify, like yolk colors and stuff. But if you're getting high quality eggs, you can tell the difference between like
Yeah,
the
that's
cheapest
something I can
eggs
definitely agree.
that
Yeah.
you're getting in the grocery store, right? And so for all this stuff, maybe it's not that important, but I think you are what you eat, literally, right? So
Yeah.
it only makes sense to, try to get the highest quality food you can. I try to get as much food as I can from like local farms,
Yeah.
farmers markets, meats, that are sustainably raised. If you want to talk about consciousness, you have to consider, well, what's the consciousness of the animal you're eating, right?
Mm,
If you're eating an animal that's been mistreated, that's been tortured, that's lived a miserable life, well, that energy is going to be in their meat in some way, right? And I don't know that science can necessarily quantify that,
sure.
but you're eating the meat from a sick animal, right? And that's not going to be good for you compared to eating the meat from a healthy, happy
Yeah,
animal, right?
I
That's
agree.
that's raised humanely, and that's living a, the kind of life that animal's supposed to live. That meat is going to be better for you, right? And I think this is true with like game meats and things like that too, right? Because when animals are wild animals, they're gonna be stronger. They're gonna have more energy in them than if it's just some chicken that's locked in a cage being fed grain all day, right? Like, you are what you eat. The chicken is what it eats, right? So I think these things are important, and it's hard to say how much value it is, but I would definitely lean toward buying the highest quality food you can and trying to get it from sources you trust, right? And local farms and things like that. That's a great place to start, for
Yeah.
sure. And then you're also supporting local business and helping out people, right, who are actually in your community, who are putting in work, right, and actually, doing stuff instead of just some faceless corporation that's who knows where,
Yeah.
so it's a big thing. What I eat, I pay a lot of attention to it. I'm always trying to refine it. So I'll have a lot of lean meats, a lot of beef. Seafood's really important. There's lots of benefits to having seafood. Shrimp, sushi is really good. Just getting the raw fish, right? There's DHA and EPA in the seafood, and so I try to get as much of that as I
And that's
can.
something you can see the difference between wild and farm raised.
Yeah,
I was just at the store yesterday. So you can just see it's like a lot. It's like a deeper red than
yeah,
uh
yeah.
than farm raised.
For sure. So, it's again though, but again to kind of bring it into the big picture, right? It's biochemistry, right? And there is a bigger picture than biochemistry, because you will
Yes.
you will see extremely successful, high energy people who don't eat these sorts of foods, right? And obviously you can access these higher states and reach all your goals and dreams and live a happy, healthy life without eating like this.
David
It's
Hawkins was always caught. I'd always see about videos drinking Diet Coke,
yeah,
and his energy was just like at another level.
exactly, right? So does it give you a small edge? Sure, it does, right? Is it better than the alternative? Yeah, but it's not gonna change your life, right? It's not gonna fix all your problems. Even if you get your diet perfect, right? It's still not gonna be enough to just, right? It's only one part of the picture. And then, especially when you consider some stuff like the importance of sunlight, and I've seen some experts who would suggest that 2/3 of our energy comes from sunlight in an ideal situation, right? And 1/3 of our energy comes from food. Well, then it's like, oh, okay, well, maybe the sunlight's really important. Maybe this is actually more important than the food. You'd probably be better off eating junk food all day and getting sun exposure than you would be being locked in the house surrounded by blue light and eating perfect food, we'll say.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so so it's only one part of it.
All right, so let's dive into it. Let's go into the deep stuff now. So yeah, I've been listening to a lot of David Hawkins again recently. What would you say? I guess what I've been really interested in lately is because to me, I create like this analogy that I think like we're all cells in a body, right? And what I've seen a lot is, and it's in part why I made this YouTube channel, is because I think that we all have a responsibility for the collective. And that can get tricky, right? Because it's like, I'm going to save the world. That's the ego can slip right in and say, hey, you know what? I'm going to be the arbiter of truth. But at the same time, I think we need more communication. I think the ability to communicate what David Hawkins is talking to, these call it common sense, call it these spiritual truths, we have forgotten them, I believe. And I find it because, my own ability to speak them into existence, I find myself like someone who's like, what are you talking about, David Hawkins consciousness? How do you explain it? And I find my own inability to explain it is my own ignorance or my own ability to, expand into my full being. So, I guess what I wanted to ask here is, I think what map of consciousness points to is like an objective truth. And I think what's happened in our world, without getting too political, and I don't want to get into it because I think there's a lot of trap questions that people get put into. But would you agree that there's like an objective truth? In other words, that the problem is, as you've said multiple times in this, it's not like you're good or bad, different versions of yourself, but that there is a higher truth that if we all aim towards, like if we all aim to be like Yankees fans, that's not an objective truth. If we all aim to be more courageous, that is an objective truth, right? But I think people get put into those boxes. So I guess, how can we, first of all, do you agree with that, that there is that objective truth? And second of all, how can we grow into consciousness, if that would be that objective truth?
Yeah, I agree that there is an objective truth, probably, but then along with that, it comes with the idea that most of the truths are subjective truths, right?
Yes.
So the stuff people are arguing about, right, for the most part, they're subjective truths, and you see this all the time with these public policy debates, right? And we'll just say abortion, for example, right? One side will say, well, the government shouldn't be able to tell me what to do with my body, and the other side should be able to, will say, well, you shouldn't be, killing these babies or whatever. And they're both right from their own perspective, right?
Correct.
Like, so it's just different perspectives. And one of them, right, we might say one's a higher truth than another truth, right? But from the perspective of the person who's making the argument, they are right.
Yes.
And the other person from their perspective, they are also right. And you see this kind of thing happening all the time. And that basically is down to a failure of communication, right?
Yeah.
Like you said, right? People generally want the same sorts of outcomes, and they don't communicate effectively, right? They get lost in the details, because for the most part, we all want the same sorts of things in our life, but we argue about the details, and we miss kind of the big picture, all the things that we have in common, because like you said, we're cells in the body. Well, it's only an illusion that there's any difference between you and I.
Correct.
Right? We're the same. And it's only an illusion that there's any difference.
We're expressed differently. We have a different background. We come from different places. We may like different foods, but deep down, we have those same feelings of guilt, shame, fear, and all the way up to, reason, love, and joy. And this conversation now is reason.
But I would say, though, more it goes deeper than that. That we are the same. We're one and the same, and that's true for the nightstand behind you too. That's the same as you, right? We are all. It's an illusion that there's this duality and separation between things, where in reality, right, you want to talk about an objective truth, right, from a higher perspective. Well, everything is the same. Everything is of one. And I've been reading this book. It's called The Holographic Universe. It's written by Michael Talbot, and it's a fascinating sort of way to kind of think about the universe and how it works. And it's basically it's that the universe is a hologram, and your brain is also a hologram. And if you understand anything about how a hologram works, not like the white light holograms like on your credit card, but like an actual hologram, it's they shoot a laser beam at something, and basically the interference pattern is recorded on film of the different wavelengths. So they're able to record a three-dimensional image of this object on this film, and when you shine a laser at it, you can see the object in 3 dimensions on the film.
Okay.
right? The interesting thing is when you cut out part of the film, the entire image is encoded in every part of the film. So you can
Mm,
cut a small square of this off and you still have the entire image encoded in this.
okay.
And this is how holograms work. And the idea is that, well, our brains work the same way, because when they've done experiments with people or with rats, even we'll say, right, they did an experiment with a rat, and they're trying to figure out, well, where does the rat store these memories? So they'll put a rat through a maze, and then they'll cut out part of its brain, right? And what they realized is that there's no part of the brain that they can cut out that makes the rat forget how to get through the maze. They could damage the rat's ability to like walk and all that stuff, but the rat always seems to know how to get through the maze. It's as if every part of the brain contains every part of the brain, right?
Mm,
So even if you only leave a tiny fraction of this brain in there, well, that tiny fraction of the brain has all of the memories in it that the entire brain had in it, right? So it's not
wow.
like these things are stored locally in one little spot. And it works similar to a hologram. And then when you expand that out to the idea of the universe, well, that means that within every tiny part of the universe contains the entire universe. So every electron contains, in a sense, the entirety of the universe, right? So this is kind of a fascinating idea, and it's just it's all just down to how you look at things,
See,
what perspective you take on it.
I've been really reflecting on like Christ and what that means, and
Mm-hmm.
like, not just going along with the crowd and be like, I'm Christian, and like that whole religionism versus religion. And I've often heard people say Christ lives within us, and I've thought about this in the sense that just playing with the idea that every single thing that we do affects everything else, even though that we can't see it. Now, when we know that, I think in our hearts, it changes the game, because it's like everything we do matters, not from a ego standpoint, but everything we do ripples in time to affect everything else. And I think about like, people will be different religions. This isn't a knock on different religions, but like the idea that the sacrifice of Christ ripples through time, and that he lives in us is an actual truth, that those who believe in that sacrifice, I guess, for the greater truth, and not martyrdom, right? Not like I have to go around and like I must
Mm-hmm.
sacrifice myself, but that, like, in essence, when you're doing Ironman, you're not just doing it for you. You're doing it for everyone else around you, and
Mm-hmm.
that affects everyone else around. And it's like you become that living example for everyone else, right?
Yeah.
You become that, and to me, it's like that becomes the reason. So back to what you were saying before, it's like that's become my reason for working out. It was when I was younger, just about feeling good and looking good, and that's still there, but it's so much more than that now. And even my relationships, if there's a disconnect in any of my relationships, to me, I have to figure out how to fix them authentically, because everyone else is looking for feedback, because if
Mm-hmm.
your relationship is weak, it's like, oh, screw that person. No, no, no. It's like now you imprint on everybody,
Yeah.
in other words.
It's reflected onto and one there's so much interesting stuff in the holographic universe, and it
Yeah.
talks all about these things that there's tons of compelling evidence for, in terms of, we want to say, reincarnation, and all the stuff that involves people with like multiple personality disorder, all the
Mm,
crazy things that people with multiple personality disorder can exhibit dramatic physiological changes almost instantaneously when they switch from one personality to another. Like scars can disappear, and they can go from a state of drunk to sober, right? Like,
yeah.
so all this crazy stuff. And one of the things they talk about, and I'm listening to now, is about near death experiences. And near death experiences are a well documented phenomenon throughout history, right?
Right. DMT is released, no?
Yeah, well, that's part of it. Yeah,
Yeah.
but the ancient Egyptians talk about near death experiences, right? There's all kinds of ancient literature. The ancient Greeks talk about it, right? They describe some of these things in great detail. Modern researchers, have also, interviewed thousands of people who have had near-death experiences. It's something like 8 million Americans at one point claimed to have had a near-death experience, right? So this is a very common phenomenon. And there's a lot of similarities when you start to compare the near-death experiences people have had. And one of the common things is the theory of a life review. Which you kind of hear about, like, oh, you see your entire life flash before your eyes,
Yeah,
right,
I've heard that.
before you die. Well, apparently this is a well-documented phenomenon that people have who have had near-death experiences, even going back to the ancient Egyptians, the ancient Greeks, right? You have a life review where you see the entirety of your life happen again, right, in full detail. And you experience all the thoughts and emotions and everything that you experience in your life, and you experience all this in an instant, right? Because you're out of your body at this point, right? So you're in almost a different level of reality, right, in a way that we can't understand. But you're able to experience the entirety of your life again, and the thoughts you had, and the emotions you had, and the way you made other people feel. So when you think about something like that, right, well, you're like, well, yeah, it's all about, how you feel, how you make others feel. The one thing that people have in common about saying after these near-death experiences, and they're guided by some sort of light, some sort of non-judgmental, loving light throughout this process, they all pretty much report back that the point of this whole thing that we're doing is love, right? You show love for yourself, love for other people, right? Like, that's all that matters. And that's what the people who have had these near-death experiences, that's what they report pretty much universally. And, it's, modern science tries to write it off as, oh, well, it's just a hallucination in the mind, right? Like, this didn't actually happen. But there's tons of compelling evidence to suggest otherwise.
Yeah. How do you balance that with reason? Because in this politically correct world, right, the key word that keeps coming up is feeling, right? Like, as you said, you everyone that you come in connection with, that how did you make them feel? And I find myself, I mean, to me, it's like, we're on Twitter, we're influencing each other by what we say, what we put out there. And to me, I find the battle between really loving other people as yourself, but also, to me, I mean, the first two commandments to me, they make a lot more sense as a older. Love God with all your strength, all your heart, and all your might, meaning focus on what is the highest truth internally and really, really grow in that, and then share that with as many people as possible. And the thing that I've really been reflecting on the past couple of years is the ability to be hated, I think, is part of that, right? Because great people throughout history have spoken just truth, and they've been hated and mocked, right? So, but how do we balance that? Because that's something that I've been really, I'm at the point now where it's like, I'm just going to say what I think. And then not just say it kind of as like, I don't give a shit about the other person, but because, let's say somebody's fat, right? We have to, I think, grow in that narrow path where it's the ability to say, you're fat,
Yeah.
but it's okay. You're not bad because you're fat, but there's something that's off within you that's, blocking. And to the deeper the truth, and the more people are attached to their little identity, my body, or whatever my political ideology is, and that goes back to what we were saying before, the pride. Like, to shatter the pride, you can't just tell people, what they feel. And I'm not saying that's what you were saying, but it just makes me think about that, right? Because on a surface level, it's easy to make people feel good, right? It's another thing to be able to say the truth to someone and to deal with the attacks that they're going to come that are within them projecting onto you. Like, how do we speak the truth in a world that wants to reject the truth, but also do it out of love?
Yeah, that's a tough question, man. If I had the answer to that one, I'd probably be doing a lot better, but I guess what I'd say is, right, like, the person, and this kind of ties into what we were talking about earlier, feeling happy, right?
Yeah.
So you want to make that we'll say the person in your life who's fat, you want to make them feel good, right? You want to make them happy. So you don't talk about them being fat. And maybe you actually give them more of the food that's making them fat, right? Because that's going to make them happy, right? Okay, you have a cupcake now you're happy, you're eating a cupcake, right? But I would say that's not really obviously going to be geared toward a deeper kind of, connecting with their joy, for example, or something like that. And, just, so communication is important. You have to communicate with them, at or around their level. So if you just point to them and say they're fat, well, that might not get the reaction that you want them to get, right? That might make them feel worse about themselves, right?
Yeah.
That might just make them shut you out, right? If you're dealing with somebody who's in a state of shame or guilt, right? You don't want to be just hitting them with reason necessarily, because it's so much higher up on the energy level, on the energy scale, that they can't relate to that. If somebody's, a good kind of rubric I use is you want to be like one state or two states of energy above the person you're trying to help.
I like that. Yeah.
So if the person is right in a state of shame about how they look, we'll meet them with guilt, right? Or meet them, so say, well, I get you.
Yeah.
I get you're ashamed of how you're looking. You should feel bad about that, right? You should, you family's counting on you, right? And all this stuff, right? And you're dropping the ball, you're going to die, right? Like you got to get your stuff together, right?
Yeah. What's tricky with that though is you have to make sure that you don't get pulled in that too, because it's like an attractive thing to be there.
For sure. But you got to meet them on their level. If you meet them with reason, you start handing them studies and stuff like that, they're going to just, like they can't connect to that. But then it's about, keep raising the energy, right? Once you get to that state of guilt, right? Maybe then you can raise it to a state of fear where you're like, well, you're going to die, right? You're going to have a heart attack. Look, get them to be fearful. There's more energy in fear than guilt or shame. So if you can get them to be in a state of fear, then okay, well, that's an improved state. Even though fear is not a good state, it's an improved state over shame for sure, right? Because at least now you care, kind of, right? And you're motivated to action. And then from fear, maybe you can get them up to anger, right? Make them feel angry about their situation, right?
Yeah.
Oh, look at what the capitalists, and selling you these poison foods did to you, right? You're angry about this, right? So now you're in an even higher state. You get the pride after that. And you can, don't you want to feel good about how you look, right? Don't you want to have the opposite sex like you, stuff like that, right? Like that's all good. And then you kind of get to those higher states, right? But that's how you can kind of get somebody out of a low state, is by meeting them at the level or just above the level they're at. Because if you're totally higher up, you're not gonna be able to kind of connect with them, right? If you see a woman on the street and she's sitting down, she's crying, and you stop and you're like, oh, hi miss, how are you doing? She's like, I'm terrible. How are you? I'm amazing, having the best day ever, right? You just have a big smile on your face. Like, she's not going to connect with you, right? You gotta like connect with her at her level. I'm all right, like so that's where you can kind of meet somebody. So you have to, I don't want to say problem with these higher states of energy is, but once you get to these higher elevated states, most of these human problems, they become completely irrelevant, right? Because if you're at such a high state, right, if you're in a state of peace, none of these human problems matter, right? So you almost have to bring yourself back down to earth, right? You have to kind of say, well, yeah, I can access these higher states. It's not a video game where it's trying to get as high a score as possible necessarily. If I want to do good on earth and if I want to help other people, right, I have to make my messaging at a certain level that the people I'm trying to help will connect with and they'll understand it, right? So even though you may be above that a certain level, right, you can get to those states. You don't want to necessarily always be there, because if you're in a state of peace, right, who cares, right? Oh, I was supposed to meet with Mike today and record this podcast. Oh well, whatever, right? And it's different than apathy. Because apathy is like, I don't care, but the state of peace is like, it'll all work out, right? In the grand scheme of the cosmos, this is a trivial thing, like it's completely irrelevant.
Well,
right?
That's the gateway to that, is that neutrality. I'm cool if I do the podcast. I'm cool if I don't.
Yeah.
And you can still like to or not like it.
Yeah.
It's cool. I'm happy if it goes one way or the other.
Yeah, for sure. It's about meeting people kind of where they're at. And, so in order to communicate your message to them, you have to be willing to kind of meet them where they're at, and one of the explanations that I've really heard about religions that made it all click from me was reading Eckhart Tolle in his books. And he kind of explained it in a way that really made me understand it, is that these spiritual figures throughout history, they were spiritually enlightened people, right? We'll say Jesus and Buddha and Abraham, right? People at that time were generally in a very low level of, in a low state of consciousness. But some of these people, for whatever reason, they were at a much higher level, and they were able to communicate their higher level, their message to these people who were in a low state, right? So when you think of we'll say Jesus, right, and his ability to communicate his message, he was able to communicate with people who were at a much lower level of consciousness than he was, these truths to improve their lives, to improve humanity, right? This is why, like, the Bible is a bunch of stories that are allegories, for
Yeah.
example, right? Because this is the way you could teach these lessons to people, right? And this
Without
is
teaching it with like a
without
finger
teaching these.
wailing. Yeah.
If you just used reason, right, and they wouldn't understand it, right? So you have to kind of teach it to them in a way that they understand it. But I feel like some of this stuff doesn't work anymore, and this is one of, we'll say, the big stumbling blocks for me. I was an atheist for so long because, well, when they talk about God, he's this guy sitting in the sky, long white beard with white robes on. And now we have satellite imaging, right? We have pictures of the Earth from space, and you're like, well, it's just crazy. There's no guy sitting up there, like, show me what, well, where is it, right? And it's like,
Yeah.
well, obviously this isn't literally true, but people get caught up on the literal thing.
The literal, yeah. Like walking
You'll
on water, or Christ
yeah
was saying to be born again.
yeah
So you
yeah
have this idea, yeah.
you'll see atheists on the internet now use the term sky daddy as a way to mock the idea that there's a
Mm.
God, right? And it's like, well, you're missing the point, right? Like you're taking this imagery that may have been effective imagery back in the day when people were in very low states, right? But now we have had a scientific revolution, right? We all, understand so much more about, how the world works and stuff like that. Well, this imagery is not going to cut it anymore, because people are going to see through this and say, well, that's absurd. The thing you're talking about doesn't exist. Science, can basically prove that doesn't exist. So, God isn't real. Well, you're missing the point, right? Because this is just imagery, and even all the words that we use to talk about this, even the map that the conscious, that Hawkins lays out, right? The map is not the terrain, and it never will be the terrain. These are just signposts to help guide us to these truths, right? So whether you want to, all spiritual truths are explaining the same thing. They're just doing it differently, So the stuff that all these different religions are talking about, if they're actual spiritual truths, they are all explaining the same thing, just in different ways. They're all talking about the same thing. And if you study the religions, you'll find there's a lot of commonality with a lot of the themes they talk about, right? Because they're all describing these same things. And a lot of, like you said, the religious nature of things, right? It becomes kind of competitive and combative, and it shouldn't be like that. But I remember, thinking about this when even being in high school, you learn about, like, what the Native Americans, right? They were polytheistic, and they believed there was a spirit and everything. And I remember thinking, being like, well, if Jesus and Christianity is the religion, well, these people, are they all in hell right now? Because none of them believed in Jesus, but they didn't even know who Jesus was. So how could they believe in Jesus, right? He was over in Europe, and they didn't have TV back then. So how could they possibly even know this was happening? So they're all just condemned to hell because they didn't believe in this?
Yeah.
Like, that doesn't seem to make much sense to me, right? Like, we have to understand that, like, they were all on the same path. They're all climbing the same mountain. They're just using different imagery, different words, different signposts to help guide them the way to get there.
Yeah. Yeah. And what's so interesting too is about that is just like I do believe that there is a heaven and a hell. It depends on how you define it. And
For sure.
I think it's really, hell to me would just be complete disconnection from your source.
Yeah, and hell, the idea that hell is like an eternal damnation, that just doesn't make sense. Because why would they want to condemn you to an eternity of misery, right? Like you go to hell, you're in that state because you're something's wrong, right?
Yeah.
But like once you kind of learn the lesson, well, then you can escape that, right? Then you can get out of that, right? Whereas
Yeah.
heaven's not probably a permanent thing either. And a lot of the kind of things I've been learning about, right? It's we're all souls who are we've chosen to be on the earth.
Yeah. I've
This
heard
is
that.
we've chosen this opportunity, and to go back to like that life review, it's the view of some people at least that we review our lives to basically figure out how we want our next life to unfold, and what the sort of lessons are that we want to learn during our time here on earth. I think a lot of people have a misconception that earth is supposed to be this paradise. Well, it's not. It's never going to be a paradise. The entire point of existence here is to overcome some sort of challenge, or to learn some kind of lesson. It's never going to be perfect. The earth is never going to be in a state of peace, because that's not why you come to the earth.
Yeah. I've heard that. Yeah. It's
It's always going to be somewhat low energy. So trying to make it this peaceful nirvana, you're missing the point, right? Like, you're here to overcome these challenges, to learn these lessons. This is the entire reason that this exists.
Yeah, David Hawkins basically said that this is kind of a state of purgatory, in the sense that you can choose where you can go down, and then you're not bad. You're going the wrong way, but you learn through that pain, And
Yeah.
then what's what I find interesting from a lot of like political views is that there's this. It's almost like there's this. When you do the wrong thing, and not wrong. Like, again, I don't mean this from a more like, I just think of my life, right? Like if I've ever done so, I feel bad within myself, right? And there's two types of bad. There's trauma related, or something that my friends or family told me, and I've attached my identity to that.
Mhm.
And I think there's a moral compass. I think there's a wrong way of doing things, right? And you have to tap into that within yourself, right? And I think when you do, you have two options. You can change it through action, right? Thy will, right? It's within you, or you can mask the guilt and shame, right? And I
Mhm.
see a lot of people doing that, saying, and that's through food, or, alcohol, drugs, sex, anything that binds us to the world. And you can remove that guilt and shame, and then you'll need more and more and more and more of it. And I see a lot of that, I see a lot of that in like the red pill, right? Because I
Yeah.
think there's a lot of red pill needed, right? You need to wake up a little bit. But
Mhm.
I think there's also that white pill too. And I've like, what I see, like, as I watch Twitter is mean, man. It's very mean. It's also very naive. And I think, like, I find myself resonating with people who have the ability to dish out some red pills every so often. Like, hey,
Mhm.
man, like, grow up. But like, there's also a very mean place. And then there's also the marketing. Yeah, again, this is just, I don't want to box people into it, but I hope to connect with more and more people who are aimed on that white pill. That it's
Yeah.
like, I've attributed it to, I just put out a video. It's like there's the lamb, there's the wolf, and there's the lion. Like, the lambs are like the naive, like, you just think this world is just like, it's all nice rainbows. No, once you get to the phase where like people are mean, this is a cold world at times. And then the lion is like, it's the neutrality, it's the
Yeah.
courage mind, right? So, and I see there's a lot of wolves out there, and I think the only way that you go to courage, that lion, is to see the lamb and the lion within yourself, lamb and the wolf within yourself. And then when that's in balance, then you naturally become that, because you see yourself in other people. You see the lamb and the wolf in other people. And I guess what would you relate to that, the blue pill, red pill, white pill, like that
Yeah.
analogy?
I think there's a lot of truth in that, and I also think that there is a lot of the way our society, or I don't want to go on a rant against capitalism or anything like that, but the way that our business enterprises are set up is, it is essential that people be disconnected from their spiritual power,
Mm,
right? And this is the most of the economy is functioning on people being disconnected from their spiritual power, right?
yeah,
People chasing happiness, right? Or rather than being in a state of joy, right? There's no money to be made off people in a state of joy.
yeah,
And when you want to think about politicians and stuff, right? People who are in a state of peace or joy, they're not really concerned with accumulating political power, right? Because why would you be, right? You're in a state of peace. You don't want to run for Congress, right? Like the sort of people who are interested in accumulating power and accumulating large amounts of money and these sorts of material sorts of things that we'll say are force, right? They are by definition in a low state, because if you're in a high state, you don't necessarily care so much, about these things. I think there's exceptions to that, right? There's certain people maybe who have a calling, but I would say generally speaking, you know, there's people selling stuff, and these are all geared toward low level sorts of things, right? Look at the news, right? People in a state of fear, right? People in a state of anger, right? There's energy in this, there's not, it's not as attractive as some of these higher states where, things are okay, things are good. So, it's Twitter is a magnifier for all this stuff. And I think all of social media is to a certain extent, but Twitter probably more than most, and Twitter accelerates these feelings more than anything, right? And if I was to maybe say look back at the difference between COVID and we'll say other flus, right, that happened, right, other supposed pandemics, and sure you can point out and you can say, oh well, this was all orchestrated by these higher ups and stuff. Okay, maybe, I don't know, I can't prove that. But what I can say, because I lived through it, was people were afraid at when this was happening. Even most of the people who weren't susceptible to these sorts of things, right? Even they took a step back, right? I remember listening to Andrew Tate talk about, right, like he took a step back and did an analysis, right, of the situation, right, before he was like, okay, well, this isn't that going to be that big of a deal, because the way these social media things, they connect us in such a way that all these emotions connect everybody. So now the person who's afraid, who's living in Seattle, Washington, well, they're connected to you right now. You're seeing them on your Twitter feed, so you're picking up on their fear energy, right? And so social media, Twitter really amplifies these energies so much more. And I think this is a big reason why things are kind of crazy now and chaotic, is because these things just get so amplified, right? And people are able to connect who otherwise wouldn't be able to connect with certain things. And it really just, it amplifies, it polarizes things. And that's, I don't think it's something that we're necessarily well equipped to handle. I know we're not. We evolved in a tribe of 150 people, right? Now you're connected with 100 million plus Twitter users, right? And then whatever the algorithm wants to promote and these sorts of things, right? Like, it's crazy if you think about how complex it is. But again, the key is to disconnect from it, right? And just, audit carefully what you're consuming, right? The energy that you're letting program you, right? And who you're connecting with.
That's something I talked about with Zach Small, the idea of like really using social media instead of it using you. I know that's kind of just, it's a nice thing to say, but when you really think about that, like you get to choose, like who do you block, who do you follow, like
what words do you mute?
Not in a like, oh, I'm gonna block this person, block that person. Like I think there's a healthy sense of let me have my, how I see the world be challenged a little bit. But is this person coming from a place where they're just bashing everything everybody says? Block. That's it. Not ready for that. I need to protect my peace.
And I mute a lot of these, words. I have abortion, recession, inflation, all the COVID related words. These are all muted on my timeline. And trust me, enough of this stuff gets through that I don't really miss anything, right? But I have a lot of these words muted just because there's so much anxiety and fear and all these negative emotions associated with these things. It's not that I'm trying to like cover my eyes and pretend like these things aren't happening. It's just I can't devote all my time and energy to these sorts of things, right? Because at the end of the day, arguing about this stuff with other people on Twitter is a waste of your time. You're never going to convince them. You're strangers, right? You're probably both right from your own individual perspective anyway, right? So you can't make any positive adaptations from that. You just gotta block it out, right? And not get involved in it. And I know that the temptation is there to engage with the negativity on Twitter. I get lots of negativity, people, I just, every time I've thought about arguing with somebody or blocking them, I regret arguing with them, and I decided to block them anyway, just
Yeah.
because it's nothing personal about that person. It's just, I don't want that energy in my life. I don't want to have this discussion with you. I understand you disagree with me. You have a different perspective. That's great. But, I'm not going to try to convince you I'm right. And you don't have to try to convince me you're right either.
Yeah.
It's a fine line between, but at the same time, I don't want to hide from the truth, and,
Yeah.
so if I'm wrong, then by all means, tell me I'm wrong. Right. If I tweet something and it's not right, then by all means, tell me it's not right. Right. And explain it to me in a way that'll make me understand why it's not right, because that I find valuable. But if you just want to argue with me and whatever, then it's not worth it.
Yeah, and you get to know real quick, like who's trying to argue, who's just trying
Yeah.
to, say like just have a challenging argument for what is the truth, because we all at the end of the day want, what is the best, what's the best food to eat, what's the best way to be for, that works for me, everyone around me, and ultimately. Um, all right, I wanted to just wrap up here. I guess we're at like an hour and a half here right now. Time flies. I've been asking my guests, what their three favorite movies are. And the reason is, I think, like, for me, it's half selfish, and it's half because I mean, I've been watching a lot of old school movies, and there's just some really good ones out there, and I want to continue to have those good vibes. And my favorites are Lion King, Gladiator, and Good Will Hunting. I love those movies, like 300, all these, like, they're just, they exude courage and people who speak the truth, and they go through challenges. So what are your top three favorite movies, and why are they your top three?
It's a tough question for me to answer. I don't know that I really have that, because I don't like to like rank and categorize things.
Or three movies that really have impacted your life?
Oh, see, I like to watch films. See, I like to appreciate I guess, the art of a film more so than maybe we'll say the message behind it or whatever. So, I really kind of gravitate toward kind of classic films, Goodfellas, for example, something like that, just because, not necessarily the sort of imagery or the message behind it as much as just the cinematography of it, right? And just like the way it tells a story. I really liked Up. That was
Yeah,
a good one.
yeah,
That one makes you pretty sad, but also happy, right? And
yeah,
it makes you feel some emotions. I like Gladiator too. That was a really good one.
yeah.
I think I have to put that one on my list. But
Cinematography on that was great too.
yeah, but again, I don't really rewatch things ever. I don't find value in rewatching movies or in rereading books for the most part, because I feel like everything you've experienced, it's in there, right? And people talk about rereading books and stuff like that. It obviously can have some value, right? If you really want to, get into it, or if it's just a fiction book and you enjoy the story and you want to relive it. But just because you don't have conscious recall over something you read doesn't mean you don't know that. It's in there somewhere. Everything
Yeah,
you've ever read is in there. And if you read an old book, if you look at it, you read, just open the page up, you'll probably remember reading it after you read it. You're like, oh, I remember reading that, right? Because it's in there somewhere. So even if you don't have conscious recall of it, all the stuff you've read and all these movies you've experienced and all that stuff, it's all informing your experience. And if you're trying to think about what this book said and stuff like that, well, you're probably lost in your own thoughts at this point. You should just
yeah.
be acting.
Well,
Because
that's definitely true for me. It could be the reason why I watch so much, because I
yeah,
have some more consciousness to grow in. But at least where I'm at, right, I can still see so many different scenes. Like I see so much. I watch it. I don't know. Maybe I just enjoy it too. And I've also thought about it, like, in the sense that, like, even the music that I'm listening to is just like it's changed. Like I've had this idea now. Like, when you see people, like, think about what their theme song would be.
mm-hmm.
It should be epic. As you said,
Yeah.
you're aiming towards excellence, right? And you just see people like down and sad, and like, what would your theme song be? And I watch it almost like watching as like really identifying with the hero of that, because like that to me is the empathy. I guess one of the reasons why I could watch a movie like Batman, or or just to exemplify that, live that. You know what I mean? You know that feeling after you see it. And I guess to your point, it's like that's in you, right? That's the message that you can just watch it once. It's already in you. So
Yeah.
I
Well,
definitely agree with that.
I haven't put my TV on in months, so I don't really watch much. And I did actually see Top Gun Maverick in theaters, and I thought it was great. That was the first movie I saw in like 5 years. So I found that great. I probably have to put the original Top Gun in my list of favorite movies too. Now that I think about it,
Yeah.
because that one had a big impact on me, and it's good energy, right? As a kid, as a young boy growing up, right? Like it was exciting, and it seemed cool, and even as an adult, it seemed cool, but I'm careful. Like there's messages behind all this stuff. Yeah, I talk about music, right? I really gravitate toward music without lyrics now,
Yeah.
or like new
With you
music,
there.
because I feel like if you're listening to old music, old familiar music, then you're gonna be embodying the state you were in when you used to listen to that, or when
That
you
yeah, a
first
lot of
heard
it's
it.
just really low. I mean, Eminem, and not to knock specific ones, but like I always think of the Eminem song,
Yeah,
the I love the way you lie.
yeah.
Like I just think of that. It's like, him aside, him out of it, those lyrics, you keep saying that over and over again, you're going to love liars. You're going to love the line. And, I think a lot of the Hollywood and all that has just been, yeah, it gravitates towards that negativity.
There's a lot of bad messaging out there, and a lot of messaging that we should all be avoiding, and that's really why I wouldn't see a recent movie for the most part, because I think it's pretty clear that the people making these movies have an agenda that they're trying to promote, and they're
Yeah.
trying to promote certain messages and certain ways of living and stuff, and that's okay. I just I don't want to program myself with that. As things kind of become more and more under control by, we'll say, large entities, right? I guess the art of it is in, the individual voice kind of gets lost. But
Yeah.
this is the joy of the internet, is you can just start making your own movies now, right?
Yeah.
You can have your own Twitter feed, have your own YouTube channel, and you can talk about whatever it is you want. So while the mass media has become more and more and more kind of, homogenized, trying to make you think in a certain way, well, now there's all kinds of other stuff you can connect to, and you can even create yourself, which is really a powerful place to be.
Yeah. I think good ideas always win in the end, no matter what it looks like out there. And I think we're seeing that now as institutions collapse because people are
Yeah.
not tuning into that anymore.
Power always wins over force in the end.
That's right. What else did I want to ask you? Yeah, so two more questions. One, I want you to, talk about anything that you're working on to share with people. People can follow you. But the last thing that I wanted to ask you is what would you say to anybody who's struggling? Because I want to always get, it's something that I really hated watching documentaries is I got filled with all this information. And then I sat there going, okay, great. Like now what, right? Like I see the end of the world documentaries, all these things out. It's like whatever. What can people do to really change their lives, and something they can do today, tomorrow, over the next week that can really drastically change their life, that they're in a dark place, that they can bring in a little bit of light into their life?
Yeah. Get sun exposure, I would say, would be the most obvious, right? And I always
Sure.
tell people, who are looking to lose weight and get in better physical shape, right? Don't try to become a new person overnight. Just, do some simple things that'll move the needle. Start walking 10,000 steps every day outside under the sun, right? Start logging your food, start making better food choices. And again, you don't have to be perfect to do that, right? You don't have to get into the whole organic kind of stuff, right? But instead of eating Fritos, eat an apple, right? Like just make better food choices. Start logging your food, right? And because that'll give you some data that you could then kind of draw from and say, okay, well, if I want to change things, you have to kind of know where you were in order to change it. But so there's kinds of stuff like that. And I would really say, though, that at the end of the day, it really comes down to self-belief. And if you believe in yourself, you can achieve anything. And the more you believe in yourself, the easier it is to achieve it. I know maybe it sounds cheesy, but that has been the thing for me that has been the biggest game changer. Is the more I believe in myself, the more the things that I'm trying to do happen, right? And but it's not something you can fake. You have to actually believe it. So that's why sometimes you have to start out really small, because if it's not something that you actually believe you can do, right? If I would have set out in 2016 to do an Ironman, well, I couldn't have done it because I wouldn't have believed I could do it. This only came about later, right? When I got to the point where, oh, okay, well, that's way out of my comfort zone, but it's not so far out of my comfort zone that it seems unbelievable. And how did I get to the point where I believed I could do it? Well, by showing up and training every day for 3 years for it, right? Now I'm at the point where now I have full self belief. It's not just something I'm telling myself. I'm not just lying to myself or repeating some kind of positive affirmation. I believe it on a deep level because I've been living it and doing it. And that's how I live my life. So, self-belief and self-love, it's another thing. And how do you love yourself? You love yourself by doing things that demonstrate self-love. Your subconscious is not fooled by the affirmations you're reading. It's not going to be fooled by what you're saying. It can help, sure. But if you're not doing things that are treating yourself with love, then you are telling yourself that you don't love yourself. So if that's smoking 2 packs of cigarettes per day, you can walk down the street and say, I love myself all you want. But if you keep smoking the cigarettes and it keeps negatively impacting your health, then your behavior is not in alignment with the words you're using. And the message you're telling yourself is you don't love yourself because you're doing this thing and it's hurting you. So, pay attention to what these behaviors are and do the things that demonstrate love for yourself. And that's not necessarily like we talked about, short-term pleasure seeking, right? Eating the candy bar isn't demonstrating love for yourself, right? It might be if you had a hard day and you just want to feel good and eat a candy bar and enjoy it. Well, that can be great. But if it's something you're addicted to, right, and you have a sugar addiction, right, feeding into that is not demonstrating love for yourself. So it's going to look different for everyone. But it's just about doing better than you did the day before. You don't have to be perfect to do better than you did yesterday. And if you keep doing better than you did yesterday every day, if you do that for enough weeks, months, and years, you will be a lot better at the end of that. It is guaranteed, 100%. There's no way around it.
Yeah, it's 100% truth. So where can people find you and anything that you're working on? And you said that you're coaching, so if people can find you for that.
Yeah, I'm mostly on Twitter at Matt Izzo, MATTIZZO, but I have a YouTube channel, which I put some stuff on. I also have a newsletter, which you can get. There's a link in my bio for my free fat loss guide or my free recipe guide. And I've really enjoyed kind of developing a newsletter because it gives me a chance to kind of explain some longer form kinds of things. So, I've been devoting more of my time and energy toward writing on the newsletter. I have like 1,200 subscribers now. It's a pretty cool thing. So, check that out. I talk about some longer form stuff, and Instagram too, Matt Izzo Fitness. I cover a lot more of my kind of like races and stuff on there. It's more just like a archive of the stuff that I've been doing and the races and training I've been doing, and a good way to connect with other people. But a lot of these tools that we have are always changing. So I need to get more into video and kind of I have a TikTok, but I have some reservations about that platform. But it definitely seems like a powerful way to connect with people and to share your message. So maybe I'll start doing more of that. But what I'm really focused on now is trying to document what my life is training for this Ironman, because I think it's an interesting thing. And if you follow me, you will see a lot of kind of what I'm up to training wise. And I'm trying to do a good job documenting and capturing kind of what this journey is like as I am in my final 14-week race build as I build up to this race.
Awesome. Well, I'll definitely post all that information underneath below. Matt, appreciate what you're doing. You're helping other people. You're saving lives because in a negative world, we need more positive people.
Thanks, bro. Appreciate it, man. Good to talk to you as always.
Yeah, you as well, man.